Welcome to Directionally Correct, a PLX podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Matthew Jackson, professor of economics at Stanford University.
Thanks to our sponsors, Lightcast. The world is full of talent data, but more data can lead to more questions, uncertainty, and stagnation as organizations sift through it to figure out what's fact from what's fiction. Lightcast talent intelligence platform answers your most difficult workforce questions to drive meaningful business results. With more than 20 years of experience as MC in Burning Glass, Lightcast accelerates your work, bringing together hundreds of billions of vetted, constantly updated data points and incredible insights to drive strategic talent decisions. Your organization can tap into the deepest open repository of skills, supply, and demand data in the world to transform your hunches into a skills-based future for your organization. Lightcast's flexible solution, used by 67 of the Fortune 100, can integrate your own data, be guided by in-house talent experts, and give you the tools and confidence to explore it for yourself. To learn more, book a demo at lightcast.io. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
Like this morning, I got kind of worried for the pod because I had like an inkling that I may have had a kidney stone. And I was like, this is going to be a nightmare if I got to stand here for an hour.
Yeah. Well, and you told me you've had those before, right?
Yeah. I had was September, was it over the summer? I don't know. It warped my mind. I'll put it that way. It was so painful.
Because I had one the second day of my new job.
Lazy
it lives up to the hype. Yeah, it's like it's not playing around.
I thought I was dying. I thought my appendix burst. I thought that something had gone terribly wrong. Did you feel the same thing?
Yeah, like I thought I was gonna die, and I went to the emergency room. I went to 3 different. It was the same. I went to one. They kind of turned us away, so we went to another. I threw up in the parking lot on the ground, and then went back to the original one because the other one had a 2-hour wait. And
God,
just like I screamed at the doctor. He said he was going to get the police to come get me if I didn't stop screaming at him. And
really?
Yeah,
man,
it was
that wild, man.
I think they thought I was like messing around or something.
Well, there's got to be so many people that come into the emergency room. They're like, "Oh, I'm in pain. Give me some fentanyl, morphine, whatever it is."
Yeah. When I thought my appendix had burst just because the pain was so acute and where it was.
Yeah.
But then I guess they can just touch your tummy, and if they let out and you don't just like writhe in pain, that means your appendix hasn't burst. And so they put me through a machine and did the whole, like, they figured out. And the guy, I feel like he was shaming me. He was like, "It's not even that big of a kidney stone." I was like, "Whatever, dude."
Well, I'm glad there's consistency in medicine because that's exactly what they did to me. It just felt my belly, and I was like, I don't know, that doesn't hurt, but like, we'll just say like the rest of my freaking torso does. Did you they give you a little cup or a little strainer to try and catch it?
Yeah, they did.
Did you catch it?
I didn't. It may still be in me for all I know. Like, in all seriousness.
I got the strainer. I didn't catch it, but I did see one come out. It was wild.
So there were multiple ones?
Apparently. Yeah, that's what the PET scan showed.
Well, Dr. Matthew Jackson, have you ever had a kidney stone?
A kidney? Oh, no. Ooh, luckily, I've heard the pain is quite excruciating.
The weird thing about it is the period of time between when it starts and when you're like in life-altering pain is only like 2 hours, maybe even an hour. Like you go from like, that feels weird to I'm dying in like 2 hours.
The worst is not knowing where the pain's coming from, right? Like you don't know what is going on, and it's excruciating. Did the doctors like proclaim that childbirth is much worse than this? To you, Cole?
Yeah. I mean, everything is like a point of comparison. Like your pain isn't legitimate. This isn't real. It's like this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Yeah.
Well, these are like network effects, right? Like everything's relative. Like you're always in comparison to something else.
Very much like a network effect. Yeah. Good
Yeah.
transition.
Yeah, judging other people's pain is something that's just impossible to do, right? You can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Absolutely.
Well, it's great to have you on, Matthew. We talked previously, but I was telling Cole I got an embarrassing story that you don't even know about this. That several years ago, I started recording your YouTube videos, and I pull the audio from them, and I'll use them to go to sleep by every so often. Often.
I'll rephrase. He told me it was every night. So
Well, you got to get your network analytic information in, man, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure that was the intention of the videos, but glad.
You know, you got to learn about little influence, little contagion, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like that's a very intimate thing to tell someone.
No, but, they say that the things you listen to just before you go to sleep or that you're thinking about, it really gets your brain going, and your subconscious is working all the time. And, whatever it's like, a lot of times I'll go to bed thinking about a problem, and then I'll wake up with an answer and have no idea how I came to that answer. Right. It's trying to figure something out. You're trying to wrangle with something. You go to bed thinking about it, and the next morning there's this light bulb that went on. And your mind was working all night, even though you weren't actively thinking about it, and suddenly it came to you, right? And it's mysterious, but it's cool.
It is cool. Well, Matthew, I'm curious. So, my understanding is that you're big into network analytics, but you don't come to it through a traditional background of what I would say most people come to network analytics. So what is your background and how did you come by studying this space?
Yeah, I mean, it was serendipitous, accidental. I was trained in math and then in economics, and having a lunchtime conversation with a friend, and we were talking about power. How do you get power? What does power mean? How do you, what are the different forms of power? What does it mean to be influential?
Was this Jeffrey Pfeffer?
Yeah, I mean, that's, that sociologists and organizational people have been thinking about this for eons. And we were just coming at it completely fresh and started looking at it more from a economics game theory point of view. And then when we started digging into the literature, we said, yeah, this has lots of applications. It's really interesting. People have looked at it, but not from our perspective, like as an economist. Mm-hmm. And so that just, set us on a path of like trying to model it with game theory and, thinking about how do you acquire power, who gets it, what circumstances. And then that led us to, just modeling networks and trying to understand them. And, it was just sort of, then you start looking around in economics and you realize, oh, networks are everywhere, and we haven't really taken those into account before. It's not like there's these organized anonymous markets where everybody interacts. People deal with other individuals and they make a difference in your life, and that changes your personal behavior. It changes business behaviors. So we just started, and then I guess for the last 25 years, I've been on that road.
This is where, I think Cole would really enjoy your work. I admire it quite a bit. I came across it from other means, but the strategic nature, strategic complements, and games on networks and this sort of stuff, and how people accumulate power. Typically we talk about, say, network influencer. They're an influencer, they're out there taking selfies, etc. But no, there's a complete dynamic that takes place in organizations or even globally. You do a lot of global financial sort of stuff, and to your point, networks are everywhere, from micro to all the way to the macro.
Yeah. I mean, and just as you're mentioning, people think of influencers as people who have just lots of followers, right? Because now we see social media, and you say, okay, look, so and so has millions of followers, someone else has tens of millions. They're even more important. But there's different ways in which you can be powerful or influential, and if you think about trying to get other people to act in concert and not just buy a particular product, but to coordinate, that's a different kind of influence. If you're thinking about trying to enact change, a dramatic change in an organization, You have to have the responsibility, but you have to have the right connections within the organization to get the right people to be able to buy into it, and so forth. That's very different. It could be, knowing a few key people is much more important than having lots of followers who, pay a little bit of attention to you. So, going through that, leads you down a network path where you're trying to understand a lot of this.
Yeah, I've heard power defined as A gets B to do something that B didn't intend to do. And so to me, the definition of like a social media influencer is very devoid of power, right? Because they don't really have a lot of that. It's just a lot of people happen to see what they do, right? Whereas power is kind of the exercise of influence. And so, like, I guess because I bet you I've come across your work before. I didn't know it was you, frankly. I'm
I
curious.
reference it quite a bit on this pod.
Well, yeah, and Scott, you're one of his greatest hits. It's because he listens to you before he goes to sleep.
Of course.
Right? Of course. But I'll say this, like, how did networks play a role in the influence of power, like A getting B to do something they didn't intend to do?
Yeah, I mean, here's an example I actually talk about in one of the books that I always find it fascinating. It's like the rise of the Medici in Florentine, Italy in the 15th century. There were lots of powerful families. So the Medici were not the richest family. They weren't the best politically connected family, but they had marriages and business dealings with other families. And when you look at the network, they look like the center of a star. So there's a bunch of other families that are only connected to, through them. Whereas the sort of rivals that they were against were in this kind of cliquish structure. And that meant, that Cosimo was sort of the first real godfather. And the godfather, you think about, why was the godfather powerful? The godfather was powerful because he could give out favors and broker favors. People had to come to him to get things that they needed. And then he could get other people to do those things because they owed. And so being in that connector position where you're able to coordinate and get people to interact in certain ways, that's a very powerful position. And it's very different than sort of being in a clique where everybody knows each other and nobody has to listen to any particular individual, right? And so that you look at that network structure and you see the power there.
I have one question, because I've read and listened to a lot of economic stuff, but I really don't know anything that I'm talking about. Is what you're talking about the same thing that economists call rent-seeking behavior? Because I know economists say rent-seeking all the time, and it's like the biggest dish you can give someone. It's like, oh, you're a rent-seeker. But is that the same thing?
R-E-N-T, rent?
Yeah,
rent. Yeah.
Like, oh.
Yeah. I mean, so, rent is this term that goes back centuries, in fact, in economics, which was originally referred to as sort of profits, right? And so economic rents, you think of as the profits that accrue to something. So like, if I have some land, the rent that I'm getting on that land, you think of as the profits that I'm getting from that, or the rents that I'm getting on some capital. Rent seeking is, in some ways, like if you think of Adam Smith, the invisible hand, that's what people naturally do. They're moving around seeking trying to arbitrage things, looking for places where they can get higher returns on their money or whatever. So in some sense, it's pejorative if you think of it as greedy. But on the other hand, it's sort of, it's what makes the economy work in some ways. People see an opportunity and often they're doing something that's helpful to other individuals. And that's part of the reason they're earning a rent for it, right? I don't know if you think about, like, Michael Jordan earned a lot of rents for being an amazing basketball player, but he brought a lot of joy to people, especially Chicagoans, who grew up in his era. So that's there's rents that are quite deserved and valuable.
No, that's really helpful. Again, I don't know what I'm talking about, but
I'll pimp one of your books, The Human Network. It was actually given to me by a friend, and it sat on my shelf for like 2 months until I was flying somewhere, and I read chapter 1. I was like, oh my God, this is sort of like a different book. It's a much easier sort of like foray into networks, and kind of changed my mind about it. And you talk about different sources of power, just like the group modeling. right? So your opinion essentially gets averaged over a number of different people. And in this way, like contagion can start flowing and et cetera. People can change their minds over, specific issues, this sort of stuff. Um, with that said, like, where did you find all this stuff? Like, not coming from a network analytic background, like, who do you borrow from? Who do you see as your influencers?
Yeah, I mean, actually, that book, it was sort of an education. Writing a book for the popular world
Mm-hmm.
is very different than writing a textbook, right? So writing a textbook, you just have to be precise, you have to be exact, you have to know, make things clear. Writing a book for the general public means that you want to convey ideas in ways that you've got sort of like the perfect examples that illustrate the points. And that means you have to find those examples. And it's very different. Like as an academic, we're used to making very specific statements. You'll say, if blah, 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 then such and such holds, right? So you're always making these qualified statements. And that sounds awful to the general public, right? You only say, well, this might happen under these particular circumstances that we happen to see in a lab, and we're not sure if the theory's right. They just want, is this going to happen or not, right? You want a yes, no kind of answer. And so writing a book like that means you have to find examples that illustrate the nuances and all the points that you're trying to make. And that means you have to borrow a lot from, just other writers, generally, looking out there in the world to see situations that have occurred that are illustrating what you're trying to talk about. And networks is this area which cuts across pretty much all disciplines, right? You find it in physics, you find it in econ, you find it in psychology, sociology, anthropology. It's pretty much everywhere. Yeah. So it's something that, yeah, I mean, the pandemic brought new meaning to networked interaction. So, you begin to see it everywhere in your life. And then in writing that book, I sort of like over a period of 10 years between the writing of the two books, like one textbook and then one more popular one, I was just keeping catalogs of examples. Every time I saw something, I would, throw it into a folder. And then I had this big folder full of stuff that I started going through when I started writing the book.
This whole pod started because Cole's writing a book.
Yeah. You want to hear something ironic about that? This has come very full circle. And I talked to a publisher today, so it may actually be happening. Yeah, not kidding.
There is life.
So it might be back on. It's gone through like multiple iterations, but
what's it about?
What?
What's the book about?
Oh, well, it's changed a whole bunch. I think we're exploring kind of a new area right now, but it's going to be related to people analytics in some way. I'll say this: I was very curious about the applications, Matthew, of how you apply concepts of networks to the real world. And you sent over this example about Facebook data connections across economic classes, and I thought this was fascinating. Do you want to talk about like some examples of how you can use this data in the real world?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, one thing that so this has been a big project that we worked on it for 7 years. And when we pushed really hard and worked with Facebook to be able to release the data. So we actually have a website where you can go and see all the data. Yeah, there you go. So if you go to socialcapital.org, you can find all the data. And effectively, so this was work with Raj Chetty, Teresa Kukler, and Johanna Strobel were former students at Stanford. And then Mike Bailey was working at Facebook. We had this huge team to get the data together. But the kind of concepts that we were looking at was, Raj had been working for many years trying to uncover what do patterns of social mobility look like, or economic mobility in the US. So when you look at a map, you see these geographic patterns where the Deep South has much lower mobility. If you look at like the Dakotas, Minnesotas, they actually have very high economic mobility. Kids who grow up in poor families end up, doing fairly well. So we're trying to figure out why is that? And a lot of the usual economic predictors and other kinds of things, just race and things like that, don't actually explain a lot of what's going on. And so what we started looking at was social capital measures. So, trying to figure out what is it about your social structure that predicts your chance of growing up poor, but ending up, doing pretty well. And so in the end, to cut to the chase, one thing about networks really popped out, which is how well connected poor people are to rich people. So look at people born with below median income, ask what fraction of their friends are above median income. That's a simple measure we call economic connectedness. So how connected across economic lines is your given area? If it's well connected, people will be mobile. If it's not connected, they won't. And it's really highly predictive. And so that was sort of, the foray we made into it. And then we dug into like things like high schools and colleges and tried to figure out where are people making friendships? Why aren't they connected in some areas? Why are they connected in other areas? And it's had probably the highest quick impact I've ever seen in any of the research I've been involved in.
Are you able to dig into the data and see that this is related to, like, say, weak ties or knowledge of different jobs that are popping up, or like different skills, or just a different way of life? Like, if you don't know an option exists, you're of course not going to be able to pursue it.
Yeah, exactly. So why does economic connectedness matter? It seems to matter at a pretty young age too. So
Yeah.
a lot of it might not be like, in the future, it can matter because of your job contacts, right? So eventually when you're out of college or wherever and you're looking for a job and you've got some friends that actually are working somewhere that can help put you in touch, that helps eventually. But at an early age, it looks like there's a lot that's going on just in terms of aspirations. Are other kids studying to go to college, or are they planning on working in the local community? Are they taking exams? Do they turn in their homework? Kids are incredibly influenced by the environment they're in. And so if nobody's doing their homework and nobody's planning to go to college that they know of, that's the path they'll follow. And so, having those connections can be incredibly important.
I
remember because you also sent the New York Times kind of visual that showed this. And I remember seeing that when it originally came out and being fascinated by it. And I've even seen other research that show, like, there's like the great sorting mechanism where like college educated folks marry other college educated folks, and people that don't go to college marry each other. And then they even settle in different locations all together. And like, you might even be able to see this encoded in people's DNA eventually, like almost like, and that being kind of a potential, or you could even see it playing out in society right now as a potential social ill, is like, if you know that economic mobility is tied to these interconnections and people are sorting themselves out and not ever interacting, it's like, this is even being codified into what it means to be a human. And so, I mean, I don't know, it's fascinating, but it's also scary at the same time.
Yeah. And you think about it, there's so many, as you point out, there's so many different forces in our lives that push us in those directions. Whether, like, if you think about schools, part of the reason that wealthier kids and poorer kids don't end up in the same classes is because you have tracking, right? You've got like AP classes and honors classes. So they get separated, and then they're hanging around different kids. And then some of them go to college, they meet other people and they hang out with them in college, and then they end up marrying them, as they say. Then they're going to live in different communities, partly based on housing prices. Can you afford the house? And so, like, there's repeated things. And now you think about, you put on top of that social media, where you're being directed to certain content or other friendships based on which platform you're on, and what the algorithm is finding for you in terms of connections, and saying, oh, this person looks just like you, you should be linked. And so, there's so many different forces that push us in those directions. It's really hard to maintain, like, diverse economic or social relationships. It's very counterintuitive, force in terms of our lives.
I'll give you a personal example. I used to work for a test publisher in Austin that created all sorts of assessments. I was a psychometrician there, creating verbal ability, mathematical ability tests, all sorts of stuff. And we were norming a cognitive ability test. And I had this like young 17-year-old girl come in, and like she scored off the charts. And we're paying these kids like $100 to take this like long 12 subtest assessment. And she's scoring off the charts. I was like, well, what do you want to do? She's like, well, I'll be a hairdresser. I was like, oh, you could do so much more based on what you're scoring here. It's like just not exposed to any sort of other environment, right? So she didn't even see that as a possibility.
It might be the hairdresser that, gets their own television show and does celebrities or something like
cognitive ability is fungible, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. I mean, it's like, people that have all kinds of talents that don't necessarily get matched to the right situations. That's tough. Yeah.
How
Well, I
about
wanted to bring it maybe a little closer, like what what's going on right now. I feel like we can't go an episode without talking about AI. It annoys me, but it's also relevant. And it seems like you've done some research related to AI chatbots and how they're behaviorally similar to humans. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah. I mean, that was a really fun project. With we're looking at how we can test chatbots just to understand their behaviors, right? So the basic idea here, this is with Xiaozhu Mei and Yutong Ji and Walter Huan, and what we started talking about. Look, these chatbots are playing important roles in our lives, and one thing that's pretty clear is that they're able to process huge amounts of data. They're able to see all kinds of things that we can't see and process stuff. So they can give us information. And so, but the ways that we're interacting with them, they can also be giving us advice or, doing other kinds of things in our lives. And the question becomes, how do you test what kind of personality they have, what kind of judgment they have, what kind of, behavioral tendencies? Are they generous? Are they cooperative? Those kinds of things. And game theory has been around for quite a while in terms of doing assessments of that, right? So you have people play games in a lab and you test, are they cooperative? Are they trustful? And so what we did is we just put the chatbots into those games and tried to see what kind of personality profile it came up with. And, was it cooperative? Was it risk averse? And so forth. And, it was actually very interesting that the chatbots looked much more human than I would have guessed. There's certain, things about them that were, surprising in many ways.
Or we're talking like Prisoner's Dilemma sort of stuff, where like you have the option to defect or accept.
Yeah, exactly. So you could play, you could have Prisoner's Dilemma, exactly. So you put, you're put in a room with there's another player, and you can either both defect and rat the other one out, or you can cooperate and neither one confesses and so forth. So you can play games like that. We had them play trust games where I've got some money, I can give it to you. You don't have to give any of it back to me, but whatever you give back to me triples. So I have to trust you to give money back to me. But you don't have any, you can just walk out with the money. There's nothing preventing you from walking out with the money, right? So that's called the trust game. And the advantage is, like, if I give it to you, you can, whatever you give back triples, right? So that there's an incentive for me to do it, but I have to trust that you're going to give it back.
This is like when we used to try to buy beer underage at the grocery store, right? Like,
yeah, you give it to some guy,
and like hopefully you get beer on the other end.
right, exactly. Yeah, that's a perfect example. And so and the chatbots behaved more cooperatively than humans typically did in some of these cases.
Here's a question: if so play the trust beer game, right? If you give the person the money and they go in and they buy the beer, but they don't give it back to you, did they break the law?
What's your recourse? What's your recourse, really? Like,
yeah, I mean, you gave them the money, so it's not stealing, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't actually give you the beer, so they didn't give underage people beer. So what? What did they do wrong?
Yeah, I guess as a lawyer, you have to know what a contract is, right? Like, if you give somebody a money and with an expectation, is that like, are you contractually bound with that person? I don't know. That's a good.
Now, are trolley problems game theory, or is that like ethics? Like,
yeah, I mean, that's in the ethics realm.
Yeah.
The game theory is more where there's somebody on the other end doing something, right? There's a person reacting to this stuff, and you're actually impacting that other person. Whereas the trolley problem, those people are getting affected, whoever's on the trolley, right? Or the person that's going to get hit by the trolley. But they're not directly interacting with you in some way. You're just controlling their fate. So it's sort of, it's a version of a game, I guess you could say.
You're the guy taking the money at the grocery store. Right?
Yeah.
You
Yeah, I'm
have
gonna
it.
respond to
It's an
this.
ethics issue now. None
Now, I was out in the Bay Area not that long ago, and I got to walk around Stanford's campus, which is beautiful. Now, are you at Stanford, or what are you doing nowadays?
Yeah. I'm at Stanford. I'm on sabbatical this year, so uh, I'm actually just writing most of this year. So I was department chair for the last couple of years,
Oh, you're not
and
drinking a lot of margaritas or something? Like,
yeah, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, right?
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's been nice. So sabbatical is really a chance to recharge a bit and you know, yeah, do deeper thinking and longer term thinking. So it's fun. It's really nice.
Absolutely. Well, I know you asked us about this before, but are you ready to do some confusion matrix?
Sure, sure.
The confusion matrix.
So we're gonna ask you 5 questions. Play along, Cole, if you care to.
Yeah.
Number 1, do you know your Uber score? This is a very social network sort of score,
Oh yeah,
social
Uber
credibility
scores.
score.
Yeah, no, I don't know. I have no idea what my Uber score is. I don't know. Can you find out what your Uber
Yeah.
score is?
I
Oh, you can look it up.
No, you absolutely. So you just click on your profile in the app, and the answer is yes. I know my Uber score because I've been crawling out from under that thing for a while. So
is
when
it below 4?
well, no, it's I think it's 4.67 right now.
Okay.
But
Okay.
I used to have a really low Uber score because when I very first joined Uber, I had like this really atrocious ride. And so I got like 0 stars or like 1 star. And so I've been working my way up from like in the 3s for a long time.
Oh yeah, I'm afraid to look. And actually, do they when they score you? Do they get to see whether you tip them first? I always wondered that. Like,
I don't know. It's
I
a
mean,
good question.
can they see it whether you tip and then score you? It's,
So another economist, what's his name? He's at University of Chicago. I've read his book, The Voltage Effect. He actually worked with Uber on those things. I read in his book, and they cannot, because he was the one who tried to
Good.
use some behavioral economics to get tipping to go up.
uh-huh.
I can't think of his name. But
Well, it's a confound at that point, right?
yeah,
It's a
but
social
they do
confound.
not show they don't get to see beforehand if you've tipped or not. So that the ratings stay pure. I
Yeah.
think it's back here somewhere. What is it?
All right, Matthew. Do you know your H index?
My H index, vaguely, yeah. I mean, on Google, yeah.
Oh, John List was his name.
Oh, John List, sure, yeah.
Yeah. So he
Yeah.
actually worked with Uber to do that stuff.
Oh, John's great, yeah. Very creative guy.
What was the question, Scott? Sorry.
No worries. We got to circle back to the Uber score, definitely. Do you know your H index? According to Google, anyway.
Yeah. Google, I think I'm in the 90s, probably.
Ooh,
93.
he's
Very
crushing it.
good.
Look at that. I don't have an H index, so I know I don't. it's 0 or whatever nothing is.
I think mine must be 2. Something like that. Okay, here we go. What's the most expensive meal you've ever purchased or had?
Oh, interesting.
Oh. No, most expensive meal I've ever had. Oh. It's almost definitely in France at a fancy restaurant in Paris.
Yeah.
I think my wife and I went to Taïwan once, which is like a 3-star French restaurant. It's one of those, once in a lifetime kind of experiences.
Was it worth it?
It was worth it because I can still remember it. I can't remember all the food, but I can remember the experience, right? So you're paying for like much more than like the food itself.
What are we talking, like over $1,000? What are we talking here?
Yeah, we're talking in that range, not less than $1,000, but it was many years ago.
Yeah, like I remember if you're just including like 2 people in a dinner, because I've paid for some dinners that were quite expensive, but for a big group. If it's just 2 people, so for my and this was accidentally my most expensive one. We went to our anniversary dinner at this steakhouse in Dallas, and the waiters offered us these after dinner drinks. Like they were like little, like it was almost like the size of like a thimble, but it was like, I guess this kind of like I don't know, it kind of tastes like Kahlua. It wasn't very good.
Liqueur of some sort.
It was like a liqueur, and we had it. We didn't realize that they were $150 a piece.
Oh,
That's just
Oh.
robbery.
Yeah,
That's just
it was just
robbery at that
plain
point.
robbery. And we were pretty liquored up at the time, and we're having a good time. So we were like, "Oh yeah, let's do it again." So it ended up being the most expensive dinner of my life, but it was just because these little drinks that we had afterwards.
I racked up an $800 bill once and like left hungry. That was not ideal. Went to Taco Cabana right afterwards.
Isn't there hazing that goes on in like the NFL where they have the rookies pay for a
Yes.
dinner? Like
Yeah.
the whole football team comes and these rookies have to foot the bill, and then they're going nuts ordering all kinds of stuff.
You've seen that on Hard Knocks,
Yeah.
Now that feels like robbery too. Like just intentionally running up the bill on somebody.
Yeah.
It's like if you're gonna do that, I'm taking all the food home with me.
Well, and take somebody who's making the NFL minimum and is likely going to get cut from the team and make them pick up the bill. It's like, this is not nice at all.
What is the most ridiculous thing you've ever purchased?
Ooh, ridiculous. I guess that depends on what you mean by ridiculous. Yeah.
What do you got, Scott?
Well, it's not ridiculous anymore because I still own it, but it was like a $45 can opener, not like a mechanical, not like a electric one, but just like one for your hand. I still own it. It's super nice. But what was ridiculous is like I was making so little money at the time because I could have purchased like $1 one, but I still have it. I think it's gonna last forever. So I don't know how ridiculous that actually is.
I went to Buc-ee's the other day and bought a bunch of Buc-ee's like stuffed animals for my kids. That was pretty ridiculous.
That's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost never shop. If nowadays I shop online, and I'm pretty minimalist. The only thing I spend money on is bicycles because I like to cycle.
Oh, yeah? Are you like a road cycler or a mountain biker?
I both actually. Yeah. So I own. I could say ridiculous. I own a ridiculous number of bikes that I've accumulated over the years.
So bikes can get crazy expensive. Like what's the most expensive bike? Is it like $10,000 something like that?
Yeah. It's in that range.
But
I have more miles on my bikes than.
They're like 2 pounds. They're like so light.
They are incredibly light. Yeah, I mean the frames
price.
nowadays are they're feather light. Yeah. They're amazing. But it's that's like the only thing I spend money on is bicycles.
Did you go to the Tour de France while you were in
France?
I've
been there. Yeah, I've seen many stages. Yeah. I'm a real fan, and definitely.
What was that like? You sit there and then they all go by in a matter of like 45 seconds. You're like, well, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, if you see the middle of a stage, it's really exactly. It just blows by you and you don't see anything. But if you go to like the start or the finish, then it's kind of cool because you see the teams, like you see all the people behind it, like the huge number of peoples that make that go. It's they call it a circus. I mean, it's almost, there's thousands of people behind the scenes making everything work, and mechanics and team masseuses and people feeding these people, and then the press, and it's just amazing all that goes into it. Yeah.
Yeah, imagine watching. It's kind of like watching Formula One, where just go right by.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a lot more interesting to see the pits than it is to see the cars go by, right?
Yeah. Y'all want to do one more?
Yeah, there's one more.
Have you ever freaked out on an airplane flight?
No.
No troubles? Never any questionable moments?
I mean, I've had troubles, but never freaked out.
Yeah. Yeah, I was on a flight into Denver once where we missed the runway.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and the pilot gunned the engines. Like we touched down, and there was this huge gust of wind. It was the old Stapleton, so it was like too close to the mountains. Really windy day. Plane got blown to the side, bounced off the runway, and just gunned the engines and went right back up. But you didn't have time to freak out. Like by the time you realized what was going on, it was all over. So
we're all good. We're all good.
Yeah.
I was flying into Prague, and I don't know if we actually touched down, but we got dang low and we went back up in the air, and like everyone's like, what the heck's going on? Like we circled the town and came back and landed. But like at some point in the air, the pilot's like, we had there was a plane on the runway. It's like, oh my God. Oh my God.
There was a plane on the runway. Small obstacle.
Right. It's like, yes, please circle.
See, I remember seeing something a while back that drunk drivers are more likely to survive an accident than non-drunk drivers. And so anytime like I feel like the plane, might have some kind of issue upon landing, I just get really calm. So I'm like, well, if something bad does happen, I'm more likely to survive because the drunk drivers, they're just like, they just loosey goosey and, they end up or more, I don't know. I think it's probably not rational, but it seems to work for me.
He sparked some memories of mine of a article I read around the innovations in bars. So like all these people get together like in the 1800s and they would exchange ideas. That's where it would all come from. Then like Prohibition came, and then the bars essentially closed, and you see like an innovation slump in these cities, right? So there is like a network effect to drinking.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I feel like that's been a theme of this episode for some reason. Do you want to do some nerdery, Dr. Jackson?
Sure. Yeah.
The nerdery. All right. One of my go-to things every time we have an academic on is I always try to pull up something related to academia that's like unsavory.
Wow. Yeah.
So this came out in Science just back in February, and it's titled Vendor Offering Citations for Purchase is the Latest Bad Actor in Scholarly Publishing. And so what they found in this article, and this is more of a popular press type of article from Science, is that there were over 1,000 researchers that they've identified that have been paying this vendor to increase their H indexes. So I thought it was ironic, Scott, that you were bringing up the H index earlier, that these people were paying a vendor who were boosting their citation counts. Again, I don't know exactly how they were doing it, but that's, I guess, under the latest issue of, what's going wrong in academic publishing is now you can boost your H index by paying a vendor. And I don't know, what do you guys think about this?
Yeah, I mean, it's predatory publishing, predatory conferences. They're all over. I mean, I get so many solicitations a day for send your article to us. We will publish it.
Yeah, ditto.
Yeah. Join our conference and you can be a plenary speaker. And, it's amazing that it's proliferated very quickly. And I have no idea like how many of them are making money off of it, but there's enough of them out there that it's, somebody's got to be making some money off of it. It's frightening.
I like to think of us as a predatory podcast. So we're just like using you. Right. How do we combat this? I mean, there's all sorts of incentives for, academics to get published, the incentives for journals to, make money. Is there a way around it? We've talked about this before, but
yeah, no, it's hard. It's hard. And that kind of stuff's been around forever. I remember when I was at Caltech, we had a student that we admitted who had a perfect score on like the TOEFL, which is like your English as a foreign language test.
Yeah, it's like what international students use, right?
Yeah. And the student showed up. They couldn't speak a word of English. Just nothing, right? Zero. And they failed out. And it was clear that the student hadn't taken that test. Somebody had to take the test for him, right? So like that kind of stuff has been around for a long time. It's just, but it ends up being harmful, right? Because that means, and then we had to be more careful about who we admitted, and then we couldn't trust the TOEFL scores anymore, and it was extra, so you'd be more cautious. Yeah. It changes your behavior, and it's damaging, right? It can be damaging.
That's like the one thing I always wonder if people who try to cheat on this. I know that show Suits, like the whole premise of the show in the beginning is the guy takes tests for people to get into law school. And it's like, what did the people think was going to happen when they got there if they showed they had a perfect score and they're like an average or below average intelligence person? Did they think they were going to fool everybody for 2 years or 4 years or however long it took to get through whatever they were doing? Like, what was their plan?
Yeah, I know. It's like they weren't thinking that far forward, right? It's like, just get in and it's your ticket, right? That's the hope.
Along the same lines, I saw recently that there's a golf tee time broker ring in California where people go in and buy up all the tee times and then charge double, triple, quadruple the actual
This,
fee for these public courses.
now you're in my realm. This kind of
Yeah,
stuff
I figured
happens
I'd bring you
all the
in.
time. I literally knew of people who created a hacking tool to hack into golf tee times to be able to get the best ones. I mean, like, people are serious about this stuff. It happens everywhere.
Yeah, and actually, it's hard to think of any like concert or like ball game you go to now where you're not buying tickets through some like a resale
Reseller.
site or some kind of
Yeah.
intermediary who's bought them up and then reselling them. It's really interesting how rapidly that's taken over. Where you have all kinds of intermediaries and different sites that are, StubHubs, and a lot of the sites resell their own tickets now.
Yeah. I actually met a guy at a happy hour one time that's what he did for a living. Is he just had these things that scraped websites, went in, bought tickets to concerts before everybody else did, resold them, and like, basically had it completely automated. So like he didn't even have a job and he made all this money from it. It was insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's a predatory conference? Like, what does that look like? Is it just...
Yeah, I've never been to one, so I don't know, but I can imagine. I mean, I don't even know, do the people still go, or they just pay the fee and then get listed on the program and then not actually have to show up?
And you get a line on your Visa for $20 or something?
Yeah, yeah.
I just think it's amazing what people will do to get tenure,
Yeah. But, part of it's like the technology comes and then people figure out ways to scam it. And eventually we figure out ways to stop this, like spam email now is less of a problem. I thought it was going to be paralyzing when email first started, right? You suddenly get all this stuff and you figure out ways to filter it and to get around it, but it's costly. Then we spend time, having coders figure out how to identify spam, and we're constantly in a battle with it. And this is the same kind. This is like, academic spam, right? It's
yes, very, very true.
Yeah. Well, Scott, have you ever looked into dream analysis?
You want to go there? Okay. This is an interesting study. It's called Pandemic Dreams, Network Analysis of Dream Content During the COVID Lockdown. So this is a cool way to get at what is otherwise obscured data. So sporadic changes in dreams and sleep patterns are normal. But did the lockdown actually change dream content? So dreams reflect our waking content, as you referred to earlier, Matthew, and it could impact collectively shared dream content. So what they did is they got 800 people and they provided dream journals over 1 week in the pandemic. I think it said like week 6, so it's fairly early on. And they applied network analysis clustering to the dream content using single words. Associated dream content, and allowed for identifying novel and shared dream content. So they identified different clusters such as disregard for distancing. So it'd be things like mistake, hug, handshake, restroom, or it could be travel difficulties. So like lost suitcase bus, this sort of stuff. But kind of it's a wild way to get at shared sort of mentality, right? We're all linked not only in like how we talk to each other, but perhaps our own thoughts.
Yeah. Shared anxieties, right?
Shared anxieties. Yeah.
Yeah. And COVID brought out a lot of them, right? We were all facing this unknown situation and lots of the same unknowns at the same time. So you can imagine that that would be on a lot of people's minds in the same way at the same time. So it's a fascinating article, right?
It really is. I mean, it's surprising. I don't know if they had like a control group to compare against, but they said there were 33 dream clusters, 20 of which were bad dream clusters, and 55% of which were pandemic specific. Which, I mean, it tells me like I don't think that many people are having bad dreams on a regular night. So I think it qualitatively changed people's sleep while that was going on, because that's a lot of bad dreams that are related to pandemic specific events.
And they said that folks that were, I don't know how they phrased it, but people that were really freaked out by the pandemic had, obviously more of this sort of content versus people that just saw it as a way to get 12 hours of sleep a night. It's like, oh, thank God for
Getting
the
your healthy
pandemic.
12
I can
hours.
finally relax.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people going through a lot at the same time. It's interesting that and the nightmare part, the part I find fascinating is that, dreams are somehow both processing our memories, helping us
Yeah.
remember stuff, but also maybe taking us through anxieties and getting us used to that. So they say, actually nightmares aren't necessarily bad for you. Like if you've had the nightmare before, then you're prepared for the bad outcomes in some way, where if you haven't, you're unprepared completely if something bad hits you and you haven't thought about it before.
What about if you have recurring nightmares? Is that the same thing?
Yeah, that's probably not good, right? Maybe that's a depression sign or something. I'm in the nightmare probably more than nightmare than the good dream guy, but I'm not sure what that says.
I keep having this recurring nightmare of me being naked on a podcast. I don't know why it's happening.
I used to have this shitty job, and I would dream all night about going in and like working with these terrible people, and like I'd wake up and like, oh damn it, now I actually got to go in and deal with these terrible people all day.
Yeah, that's funny. Well,
do you
Scott,
have a favorite moment from the? Do you have a favorite memory from the pandemic? Do you miss anything from the pandemic?
Let me think. Honestly, the beginning of it was quite miserable. I felt like we didn't have a home office, and so I had to turn my bedroom into my home office. And so I wake up, and I think it was the point of comparison thing that really drove me crazy. So I wake up. The only time I'd leave my room was to either go to the kitchen to get something or to go to my bathroom. But I sat right near the window in my bedroom, and everybody else, it seemed like on Earth, wasn't working, and so they're all outside throwing frisbees, walking their dogs, like living their best life, and I'm sitting in here like literally not leaving my room for like 23 hours a day, like I'm in solitary confinement, and it was driving me nuts.
We ended up having my daughters move back home. They were back home for the time, so that was really and the one nice part about it was having them at home, and we just family together time. But played a lot of games. I think
a lot of games.
Yeah.
Early in the pandemic, I was living in a semi-high rise in Dallas, and I made friends with the pigeons. I started feeding the pigeons on my little stoop there. Yeah. But it is funny, like early on when everyone went like remote and we started like going into like this like Zoom culture, I saw a lot more like headsets when people got on Zoom. Everyone's like wearing a headset, and like you don't see that anymore. Everyone kind of gave that up.
Well, I think the technology got better too.
Did it?
All of it. Like, well, I mean, I hope so. I remember. I mean, we were using WebEx. Who uses WebEx?
Yeah.
Does anyone use WebEx anymore? And so, like, I think, we could say, it didn't get better, but I mean, WebEx was pretty bad. Well, I know one of the running themes, Scott, that you have is about where people sit, when they go somewhere. And I think you found some research on that.
Yeah, I can't find the research that I'm starting to believe that I made it up in my own brain, but I remember some research where it showed that in a classroom, a professor or a researcher put Confederates into seats of people that he knew already sat there, and then measured the next class period how early they showed up to reclaim their seats. Well, I didn't find that, but I did find this one, the psychology behind why you always want to sit in the same seat. So what they claim is people claim seats as a tacit peacekeeping agreement where it allows you to regulate and control your relationships with other students. And one professor took photographs of their class, and they found that people settle into a preferred seat as early as the second class period, but no later than like a month into like a long-term, like semester-long course. Women are more likely in general to claim a seat, particularly one with more space, because they believe they have bags and just kind of need more, room, as it were. But it reduces mental energy, and this is also why I wear the same thing every day. So,
well, they said it's a bit. behavioral expression of territoriality, which comes from evolutionary psychology, which I was like, wow, that's a really dressed up way of saying that people just like sitting in the same place. But yeah.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting territoriality is associated with. I mean, I can characterize some, like in a classroom when I'm teaching, there'll be some people that sit in the front, but often because they actually want to record the lecture, or they are, really want to see what's going on the board, and maybe they have their eyesight or whatever. And then there's people who sit way in the back, and they're maybe on their computers, maybe watching La Liga or something. They're doing something else altogether, and they're sort of disconnected. And then there's a lot of people in the middle, and I don't really track whether people are always sitting in the same place, but it's that there's different reasons for people choosing seats. So maybe some of them are being territorial. I don't know. It's
Can you point out any of them and like notice when they're gone? Like, okay, there's someone that always sits there.
Yeah. When the people who sit in the front are missing, I notice it. Yeah.
Oh.
And they're usually the people who show up at office hours and are asking the most questions, and they're probably the most engaged people. Like if you're sitting way in the back of a classroom, it's pretty easy to be disengaged from what's going on. And it's like, why are you here? What's the point of being there if you're not paying attention?
Yeah. It would be funny if, you had a removable desk and you could literally play like a game of musical chairs where every class period you just remove one desk and see how people react to
it. Like there may be some advantages to like shuffling effects, right? Like meet a new neighbor, but apparently that may disrupt their mental state drastically, right?
Yeah.
Ooh, that would be an interesting experiment if you got to choose where people sat in the classroom, and maybe even like groups that people had for group projects, and if that increased or decreased the learning that happened during the course, or I don't know, that would be an interesting one.
Yeah. There's a bunch of studies that people have done on study groups. Like if how you put together study groups and matching different students together, and how it can make a difference in what they learn. So that's a pretty active area in social psychology and the education literature as well. So it's definitely stuff people study.
Based on what I've seen from like I said, like I listen to your your lectures as I go to sleep on occasion, and like what is really striking is sort of the collaborative nature that you have, at least in some of the classes, where students speak up more frequently than I would anticipate them doing, and like interrupt you, asking questions about I don't know, preferential attachment, just this sort of stuff. Like, do you intentionally bring that out, or is that just like a nature of like the caliber of the students, or like, do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ideal classroom, and this is something I learned like in doing online courses, it has to be interactive, right?
Yeah.
There has to be back and forth. If it's just you lecturing to somebody for hours at a time, it's almost impossible. It could be the most interesting stuff in the world, and if it's just one person talking, it's really hard to pay attention and to listen. So it's got to be back and forth. It's got to be a discussion, a dialogue. You get, an idea of what people are understanding and not. It breaks it up. It gives different viewpoints. It's so much more interesting when it's a dialogue than when it's just one person lecturing. Yeah. These huge lecture classes, that's really hard to do.
Oh yeah.
I have a question. So Scott and I both come from a people analytics and I have a psychology background, but people analytics in particular here. Is there any network related analytics that we should be doing in this space that maybe you haven't seen before that you think would be a good idea to approach?
In terms of people analytics, I guess, one thing I always think that's really interesting is when you look at organizations, they grow somewhat organically, and they grow differently based on who might be there. And that the network that grows internally can be either very functional. It could be that there's lots of communication across key different parts of an enterprise, or it could be that it's really cut off and these people just don't talk to each other. And that's not something you get from an organizational chart, right? An organizational chart like gives you who's responsible for decisions and who reports to whom, and who has discretion over stuff. That's very different than what's the actual communication that's going on inside an organization, and who's going to be able to communicate with whom, and who's good at communicating those kinds of communication skills, and then whether or not it's happening, that kind of analytics is I think, really important to understanding whether your organization is doing well or poorly. And it's stuff that's there, right? I mean, you've got all different kinds of ways of measuring your email content or Slack or however your organization meetings, who's meeting with whom, and is there real productive collaboration going on across units that need to talk to each other?
It would be interesting. I don't know if this type of research is done, but like doing organizational counterfactuals of how the networks were built. Like if these two people had connected, or if these two departments had collaborated, how would have things changed otherwise? I don't know, that seems fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know, this maybe is a weird example now, but if you look at Boeing and you look at how its quality control was sort of divorced from its profit, it's like somewhere along the line, it got broken. Like, the people that were supposed to be doing all the quality control and making sure that stuff was being built correctly were no longer talking to the people making the decisions about how fast to go, or they were being ignored. Like there was a fundamental communication breakdown about what the mission of the enterprise was and how it all builds into profitability. And that kind of stuff's really, you got to make sure that your organization that there's not some unit that's just not functioning because it's not being listened to.
I don't think that's weird. I think it's very practical. Considering what's been going on.
Yeah. And it's pretty easy. I think, when you look at organizations that grow and keep growing quickly, it's hard to plan it in advance, right? How do you decide, like, if you're NVIDIA or you're Meta or something where you went from like 100 employees to tens of thousands in a couple of years, it's very difficult to make sure that you've built the right enterprise and the right communication channels.
I think there's a lot of work to do around culture. How do you, especially when you're hiring that many new folks? There's obviously collaborations across groups. I think like we're becoming more team based. It's hard to get anything done in an organization alone. So you definitely need to collaborate. And I limit whenever I hear people say like, well, you can't really do much with network analytics. Like, well, then fucking get rid of the email system. If communication is not important, then let's just get rid of the communication.
Yeah, I always think that that's a limit of their knowledge and imagination of network analytics, not so much a damning, artifact of network analytics. But Matthew, it's been fantastic having you on as a guest today. I'm really grateful. It was good meeting you and learning more about what you're doing. Scott, any final words for Matthew before we wrap this up?
Oh, thanks for showing up. We really appreciate the knowledge you shared. It's great talking to you again.
Yeah, cool. And Scott, dude, thanks a lot. I mean, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you've been listening to Directionally Correct, People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Dr. Matthew Jackson. Thanks for joining us, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Take care, guys.
Hey guys, Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support.